Hi, my name is Chris Ryan and this stunning golf course you see behind me is Finca Cortesen here in Spain, where we're going to film a couple of videos on how your hips move in the golf swing. It's going to be a very short series, just 2 videos. This first one is going to be looking at setup and what those hips do during the backswing. And then the second video, which you're going to follow shortly, will look a little bit more at the downswing and how they move through into impact. So this stunning par 3 that you see behind me is the 12th hole here at Finca Cortesen. It's just the 225 yards to that well-protected green out there. So I definitely need to get my hips moving correctly in this golf swing if I'm to hit a decent shot. So this video is going to very much look at what the hips do during setup, what they do during the backswing, and then that second video, as you said, is going to look a little bit more at the downswing. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to kind of use the face-on view, and really what we really would like to have the hips doing at setup is being slightly closer to the target. This is going to help us put a little bit more pressure through that lead side at setup. I generally like to say about 55% of a golfer's pressure on that lead side when they're hitting shots from the fairway. Obviously I've got an Ironman here. So the way we do that is we just use the knees and the hips and we have them slightly bumped towards the target. That just gives me that sensation of that slightly increased pressure. Now when I have that little movement forwards, we would generally like to see that make the lead hip go fractionally above the lead hip, so the trail hip. So my left hip in this case is slightly higher, so I've got a little bit of tilt through my hips, and the hips being slightly forward is putting a little bit more pressure onto my lead side. The easiest way for you to get that visually, take a golf club, just place it under your belt and try and get that as accurately as you can to represent your hips, and just have them being slightly forward and slightly up. So it's quite a very visual thing. You can do this obviously at home in a reflection or a mirror. What's really common is to actually have the hips back and have the trail hip quite high. When we have that, if that golfer sets themselves up with a trail shoulder lower, which they often do, it's a real mismatch. So we get the angle across the shoulders being one way and the angle across the hips being slightly different. Those golfers really struggle to kind of function their body well during the golf, and we often see lots of lateral sway, and often that's the kind of first point of breakdown when we see their faults. So from this face-on view, we want the hips slightly forward, slightly up, helping you with a little bit more pressure on that lead side. So what do the hips do in the backswing? Well, effectively they turn, they rotate, which is hopefully going to be a fairly concept that you've used before. What we do have to appreciate though is how they turn. Notice how when I make my backswing, there's an angle across my hips. They've not turned level. There's an angle across my hips because that's what I set at address. When I tipped my pelvis at the setup, that creates, when I rotate, this angle here where my trail hip is now much higher than my lead hip. How much that angle is will depend a little bit on how much you rotate, but what has helped that, or what has helped facilitate that movement, is what's happened with my knees. You can see my trail knee has started to lose some flex, my lead knee has started to increase in some flex. That helps me get that angle across my hips. All too often I'll see golfers kind of trying to maintain the knee bend in this trail leg, and we get these hips turning very, very level, and what that does is it creates the upper body to not work particularly well up above those hips. So I really want you to focus on rotating the hips on the angle and allowing the knees to move in such a way that we get the extending trail knee, the increasing flexing of the lead knee, and feeling very much like that right hip is getting a little bit higher. There are some great examples of golfers that do this fantastically well. Dustin Johnson, we'd have to say, has got fantastic hip action. I really like what he does with it. His legs change flex, he turns his hips on an angle, helps him very much on the downswing. The final point in this video is to make sure that as we're rotating, we're not moving them laterally in any direction. Very often, the lateral movement that we see is a little bit more away from the target. We tend to see this quite commonly. It does often come from setup, which we've already discussed. So the final thing would be just to make sure that as we're making this rotation into our backswing, the hips are staying very, very centered. And I actually like with an iron to see the trail hip very, very slightly move towards the target, because that helps in the recentering early in the downswing, and it helps us as we start to approach that golf ball. So if you're looking to get your hips to function better in the golf swing, let's check the setup, let's check they're rotating on an angle, and then finally let's check that they're rotating very much over the golf ball. They're not sliding away from the target or towards the target. I very rarely see golfers sliding towards the target, but very, very common to see a golfer move away from the target, and that tends to give us lots of issues in the downswing. So let's go ahead and see if I can hit this ball on the green. I've got a 5-iron, which I think is probably only just enough club, so we'll see if we can get it somewhere on that putting surface. So hips good at setup. Let's see if we can get them moving correctly in the golf swing. And that's not too bad. It's gone a little left where I wanted. It might just catch that bunker. Okay, it's probably just caught the bunker, so that's going to require a good up and down to save my par. So hips, set up, backswing, get them working correctly, because it's very difficult to get them working correctly in the downswing if they're not doing the right thing in the backswing. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you stay tuned for the second video, which is going to come in a couple of days' time. That's going to look, as I said, at the downswing. But huge thank you to this fantastic golf course for having me here for a few days and allowing me to have access. This is definitely one of the best courses I've been on, Finca Cortesen in Spain. Well worth a visit if you are in the area. Thanks for watching. Usual stuff is down below, comments box, like button, and also the subscribe link, which is over here, clickable link. That will allow you to be a free subscriber. Would love to have you part of my channel, and would love to help you